Welcome to On Air with Kash. Our guests today are the writers, stars, and producers of the new feature film Generation Rex, which just premiered at the 2021 Dances with Films Festival. Please welcome Victoria, Leigh, and Bridget McGarry.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Oh my goodness, it's an honor to have you both on, Victoria and Bridget. I know the two of you meet each other on the set of Law & Order Special Victims Unit. You were playing sisters in an episode. The idea for Generation Rex was, Victoria, your father, Kevin T. Morales, the filmmaker, he had been wanting to make a film about being a teen in the 90s, which is when he grew up, but he wanted a more authentic teen perspective and a strong LGBTQ point of view. And that's when Victoria and Bridget, you two teamed up to write Generation Rex.
Yeah, so my dad kind of pitched the original two characters, Stacy and Liz. Stacy is played by Bridget McGarry, and I play Liz. And my dad pitched those two characters and their kind of central conflict to me. And he was like, and what if you play Liz and Bridget plays Stacy? And they weren't named at the time, but you know, the gist. And he was like, and you guys write it so that we get more women in film. You guys can start your careers, because Bridget and I were both really interested in filmmaking. And I was like, that's a great idea, because I felt way less intimidated by the task when Bridget was around. And, you know, she's such an optimistic person, and she really kind of kept me going through some of this. So we sat down to dinner, or it was lunch, with Bridget and her dad, and we pitched the film to them, which was really fun. And my dad just like didn't eat the whole time. We all had like finished our food, and his food was sitting there untouched because he was just talking a mile a minute.
Generation Rex, it's set in the spring of 1994. It follows the story of, like you said, it's Stacy and Liz. They're two 11th graders. There was a falling out around the time they were in 7th grade, and the story takes place on this camping trip. It's really a way for them both to connect after Liz had a tragedy in her life.
Yeah.
Yes.
And basically, my character, Stacy, she feels horrible about what happened to Liz and her family. So I'm trying to make amends. So I invite her up to, the cabin for the weekend like we used to when we were little. But Liz really isn't having it, because my whole friend group was making fun of her for years. Because at this point, Liz and Stacy are very, very different. Stacy's a popular cheerleader, has a football boyfriend, and Liz is kind of a goth geek. So especially in the 90s, those different groups who didn't get along too well. So Liz ends up inviting all of their friends from GATE, which is the Gifted and Talented program from when they were younger. All the people that my character Stacy is not friends with anymore, and I do not like. So that's kind of adding to the conflict a bit. And you also get to see all of these other kids who really did go separate ways, but are coming back together after such a long time being apart.
And it's such a relatable story as well. I mean, even recently, I was just this past weekend, I was at a friend's wedding who I grew up with. We're millennials, so I feel like we were between the Gen X and the Gen Z. So, I mean, even though I wasn't in high school or college until the 2000s, I can still remember certain things happening in the 90s. So I feel like I just have those points of references. And it's interesting when I was talking to people that I went to school with, and just struggles that we were all having that we didn't know, or just certain, we were all facing different obstacles or just coming to terms with certain things. I was actually talking to someone recently in another interview about that step from elementary school where you're all friends with people, and then middle school, especially in middle school and elementary school, I realized I wasn't always the first pick for sports. I was more artsy. I was into making films, and definitely know what it's like to feel like an outcast. When I was in 7th grade, my friends and I, we were like making movies. We would our sleepovers were we would watch a movie, then we're like, oh my God, let's recreate this. So we'd go get our parents' camera and be like, okay, let's do this. And we're going to make this scene. And so that was really our inspiration as well too. So when I see both of you start writing this thing, and then you have this product and to premiere at Dances with Films, and I do think Dances with Films is one of the better film festivals in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. We had a blast.
It was Kevin's idea, being a Gen Xer, to take place in the 90s, as we've touched on, but it was really important to have a strong LGBT representation and theme. Victoria, I know from a conversation that you and I had prior to this interview, you really felt a connection with Liz, and you wanted that representation through the eyes of someone from your generation, really capturing the time of the 90s.
Yeah, I'm a queer writer and actress, and I think there is a lack of representation for queer kids, and I think there's a lack of positive representation. I think a lot of queer stories end in tragedies or it ends with a like, this character can't truly be happy, or they can't truly be themselves, or they can't be happy until they can come out and be themselves, and coming out isn't the end all be all, and it's not the only queer story. So we wanted to tell a story that wasn't just a coming out story, and we wanted to tell a queer story that didn't end in tragedy. And so I put a lot of that into my character Liz, and Liz is, her story starts in tragedy, but that tragedy has nothing to do with the fact that she is queer. And we wanted to make sure that though it is clear that Liz is being bullied outside of the characters that we meet at the cabin, that there was no excessive homophobia or mean behavior from the kids in the community, because I'm tired of seeing it and I don't think it helps anyone. I think we all know what homophobia looks like and sounds like, and I, as a queer creator, didn't want to put more of that into the world. And so there is a few snide comments at the beginning from Stacy's boyfriend, but once they're at the cabin, there's no excessive uses of anything that's directly homophobic. I wanted the characters to have a positive relationship, and I think it's known that there's homophobia in the outside world and there's homophobia surrounding them, but these kids are kind, and there are kind kids and friendships, and not every queer story needs to be about homophobia 24/7.
Again, I commend you for telling the story. And I agree with you where I feel like things are getting better. And that's why I love going to film festivals and just so many independent movies. I feel like there's so many different voices are being heard. And when I see something that happens during a time when even like I was growing up, it's, it's amazing when I watch something like a show that I watched 20 years ago and you're just like, whoa, they were, certain things seem so out of date. And like, you could get away with saying certain things. And I remember being a kid when my parents would watch something from the 70s, like, oh, they did that on television. And you see how far we've come. And I mean, there was actually something with what you had said. It reminded me of a time when I was bullied in school. And I remembered it was right when Ellen DeGeneres had come out. And I remembered it was really like a milestone as far as just having a celebrity of her caliber being open and then on the show. And I remember at the time, there was a lot of backlash. This is before she had her current show. But I remember I felt like the teachers were addressing the issue in case any kids needed somebody to talk to. And I remember that same day, someone there was a Time magazine cover of Ellen that said, "Yep, I'm gay." Someone had taped that to my locker. And I remember just how I felt. And then I found out who it was. And I thought that person was my friend. And then, at the time it was just kind of, I felt like, oh, I'm like, I just have to suck it up and go through it. But then a year later, we became friends. And as we got older, we had more talks and I was able to understand what he was going through at the time and whether he had misplaced anger directed at whatever he was struggling with. So it reminded me of just, there were times when I was bullied by people. So to see this represented in film where you can be best friends, you have a falling out, but then with your film, there's this theme of let's understand where we're coming from and move forward and have positive role models and positive themes.
Right. And
Go ahead.
Something you have to remember is when you're a kid, everything feels so big, but you also have to remember that, they're still teenagers. So they're still learning how to form relationships, how to keep those relationships, and how to make up for the past, because things happen in 7th grade. And, they think, oh, now I can't be friends with this person because we had this horrible thing that happened in 7th grade. And it wasn't right. It wasn't good, but these kids are still learning. And I think that's something that is really emphasized in the film as well, is because, they're only like 16 and 17 in the movie. It's also like a learning process for all of these kids, as well as learning, oh, like I can accept myself for who I am and I can accept other people for who they are. And that's a really good lesson, I think, for teenagers, especially, to learn. Even in this day of social media, I hope that this film will, help kids, realize that, you don't have to put on this huge, mask because you think, oh, people won't like me unless I'm like this. So I really hope, kids of today as well, to be open with their friends and to be open with themselves and to just be who they are, because that's the most beautiful thing in the world.
You both said something really important about the characters and the representation, where it's not a tragedy, it's an enlightening story. When we were growing up in the 90s or 2000s, it seemed like a lot of movies, it was the traditional boy meets girl and there's jocks and you have to fall into these categories. And it seemed like the message was accept everyone for who they are, but they were always making the jocks or the cool people were always prevailing and looking cool. And it seemed like anyone else who didn't fall into that category, it was kind of a backstory or just kind of a person that appears. And when I go to film festivals, I see filmmakers with their own ideas, with their fresh perspectives. And I think that I do commend your generation for really taking that leap and making a film like Generation Rex that I think that will help people growing up and even adults. I just feel like we can all be enlightened by this and be like, this is a fresh, authentic perspective. So really, congratulations on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's very grounded in reality. And I think that's what makes it so special is that it is not the Hollywood version of being a teenager and of being in the 90s. It is the real life version. And it's very grounding. And I think a lot of people were surprised with how grounded it was. And I think it really helps, viewers create empathy for these characters as well, because you're like, oh, wow, like I felt like that too. There's kids out there who don't fit into one of those groups, but that's okay because those groups are kind of like a Hollywood thing anyway. It's not even real life anymore. I really hope that teens watch it because they'll see how grounded it is and how that even though, it takes place in the 90s, it's still relatable because it's about being a teen and that's something that's universal.
Yeah, and I think that was why it was really important that for our film, that Bridget and I wrote this film. We started writing it when we were 16. We wrote the majority of it when we were about 17. So we were still living all of those really intense feelings. And so we couldn't be cynical about it. Like I can be cynical about like being a teenager now, but I'm not a teenager anymore. And I can look back and be like, yeah, it was really silly that I thought the fact that my costume wasn't going to get finished for Comic-Con in time was like the end of the world. But it felt like the end of the world at the time. I thought that was really important that Bridget and I got to put those real stakes in and we got to put our real lives in, but also we had distance from our real lives because this movie took place in the 90s. And something that was a big thing for Bridget and I in high school is social media, all of these things that didn't exist in the 90s. So we could separate ourselves from our characters, but still put that energy, those feelings, those fears that we were having into our characters and make it really authentic. And I think another thing that was hard for me, something that was hard for me was I wanted to use a bunch of language around being queer that I had, but that Liz didn't have. Since the age of 11, I have been able to be on the internet by myself and research whatever I wanted. So I've known a lot about different LGBTQ terms since I was very little, whereas I don't think Liz has that same access to knowledge. So in my eyes, Liz is bisexual, but she doesn't know how to talk about it. She doesn't have a word for it. And the word that she does know is lesbian, but that's not the right word for her. And that was something that was hard for me because I think something that is good bisexual representation is when you get a character to confirm they are bisexual and like to say it out loud. But Bridget and I had to honor the time period in which our movie was taking place and what the characters actually knew. So I think for us, we got to break down some stereotypes in our film. And so Bridget's character is kind of a stereotypical cheerleader bully. My character is a stereotypical like goth, kind of like edgy girl, outcast. Yeah. And then, we've got like the stereotypical stoner and all of those things. But I think what Bridget and I did that was really cool is that, we were really getting used to being stereotyped through our auditions, and we got to take those stereotypes and break them down and turn them into something different over the course of the film. I think Bridget can talk way more about her character, Stacy.
I think with Stacy, she's putting up this mask and she thinks that, oh, I have to act this way, I have to dress a certain way in order to feel accepted. And that's something that I personally went through in middle school because it makes me jealous now that all of the girls on TikTok who love Marvel are like being celebrated. And it's like, oh my God, like, wow, like that's so cool that a girl likes Marvel. But when I was in middle school, when, it was really the start of the MCU, I was bullied a lot for liking Marvel. And I would wear like my Thor shirt to school and all of my different nerdy things, and I would get made fun of by the boys and by the girls. And it was really bad. And my school was a very preppy school. I started begging my parents to buy me stuff so I could look like everyone else. I hated the way I looked, but I was like, oh, well, I'm dressing like everyone else, that they should like me now. And it didn't really work out that way. And it wasn't until I went to performing arts summer camp, and there was this one girl, and, I had this Captain America tank top, and I'm like, oh, I can't wear this. She's like, why not? I'm like, because like, it's not cool. She's like, who cares? She's like, well, you like it, so that's why you should wear it. So she's like, doesn't it make you happy, like, when you wear stuff like that? I'm like, yeah. She's like, then wear it. She's like, why are you wearing stuff that makes you miserable? And I listened to her advice, and I was so much happier. Throughout the film, you can really see Stacy's mask coming down, and she's having a great time with these kids because she's not pretending to be someone that she's not. And you really see that, and you see her walls come down, and you see Liz's walls come down too. All of the characters,
Absolutely.
they all have this, different kinds of masks, but they all have a mask, but you see that broken down throughout the film. And, as that happens, they're having more fun, and they're having a good time. And, I really hope that message relays to teenagers, because be yourself and do the things that you like. You're going to have a lot more fun.
And you're going to attract the people who also like those things and who actually want to be your friend. And like, Bridget and I, when we first met, we started talking because we were in tutoring together because, child actors. And I was working on like my history homework, which I think had to do with like ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
So Greek mythology got brought up. And so I made a joke about Percy Jackson, which was my favorite book series that my friends absolutely made fun of me for loving. And Bridget was like, I read those books too. And I was like, and like that was sort of a friendship. And sometimes talking about the things that you love or how you attract people who love those things are the people who should be your friends, like Bridget being my friend. And Bridget and I go and see like most of the huge Marvel movies together. You'll attract the people that you love and who are meant to be your friend if you actually get to talk about the things that you love. And I think we had characters who, we took all those like stereotypical characters from a 90s comedy, like The Breakfast Club, and go, okay, how does the nerd interact? How does the cool girl interact? How do all of these kids deal when they're in a cabin together? And the first night that they're at this cabin together, it's really awkward. And they're kind of talking about nothing because they're not revealing anything about themselves. And over the course of the film, that changes.
I'll admit, I went through so many phases as a kid too. And so middle school rolls around, and I literally was in this environment element. I just didn't fit in at the school. I was always getting bullied. So I go 7th grade, you want to reinvent yourself. I went with like the skater look. I wore like the baggy pants. I mean, with the back pockets down to the back of my knee. And I looked ridiculous. And it was right to the skater thing. And then it really wasn't until the next year, I just started dressing differently. And I liked listening to movie scores. I went through like a Jim Morrison phase. I grew my hair out and wore leather pants to school. I was like, this is me. Or I'd wear and then I went through a 70s phase. And
that's so cool though.
Oh yeah, totally. And then like I went through whatever I was feeling, and people would kind of look at me, and again, this is in the 2000s, but I feel like all that stuff is so cool now. And the people who were kind of ripping on me for doing that, or they're listening to the kind of music that I was listening to, or it's one of the things that stood out was like, I like Back to the Future is like my favorite movie of all time. And I was just really into that soundtrack. Everyone's always listening to the Back to the Future soundtrack everywhere now. So it's okay, maybe I was ahead of the game, or I turned out okay. Yeah. You got Heather Matarazzo to be in this movie as well too. Now, she is a 90s icon. Welcome to the Dollhouse. That is a movie that, it was one of those movies I think we watched late at night in elementary, like we had to sneak to watch that movie, but everyone that I know who's into movies, like just captured everything about just being an outcast, being bullied, and just struggling with an identity. That's just amazing to get her in.
My dad was friends with her on Twitter. They were Twitter mutuals, and my dad tweets a lot. He has more followers than me on Twitter. I'm not bitter about it, but he reached out to her. Heather is a bit of a like lesbian icon, and was like, hey, my daughter and her friend wrote this script and they're trying to make this film, and there's a role that like we would love for you to play, but like at the very least, like we'd love to have you read it and hear your thoughts. And we reached out to her, and she read it, and she was like, I think she was really moved to see Bridget and I doing something that was about being that had such a strong LGBTQ theme at the center, and that was something that she kind of got some flack for in her career, and she was really happy to help out, and she said some very, very kind things to me at the premiere, and I feel so grateful to have the support of her, and it's kind of such a full circle thing.
I love the process, and then just everything just came full circle with this. I can't wait for audiences to see it. Victoria and Bridget, I commend you both for making this brilliant movie. I can't thank you enough for your time today. I just think that you have a great message to send out there for your generation. And I think that there's even just something for my generation and Gen X to learn as well too. Everyone, this is Victoria, Leigh, and Bridget McGarry. They are the writers, stars, and producers of the new feature film, Generation Rex. It had its world premiere at the 2021 Dances with Film Festival. Victoria, Bridget, thank you again so much for your time. You continue this epic career of yours, and you keep inspiring and creating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me and Victoria and Bridget today. You are on air with Kash.
Bye, guys.